My last speaker is Mzila Mthenjane, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Minerals Council of South Africa.
Good afternoon, and greetings to all and all protocol observed. Let me start by saying that I think, Errol, you are actually giving away your age because you don't remember that I was here with you last year. So, happy to be here this afternoon to share with you and really to build on what I came to present last year in terms of really the story of how government and business in South Africa is working together. And how I'll go about sharing the story is really just to give you a brief outline of South Africa's mining industry and touch on a few slides on how this partnership has been evolving. And really from where we are as a country and an industry, we really do see a bright future for the mining industry, not only in South Africa, but for the continent as a whole. And so the story of South Africa's mining industry really can be told through the Minerals Council of South Africa, or what used to be known as the minister now and again likes to say when he takes a jab at us, the Chamber of Mines of South Africa. We're a primary advocacy body for about 73 members as at the end of 2023, who are responsible for about 90% of South Africa's mineral production by sales. Half of those members are junior mining and exploration. And our purpose statement is essentially to co-create an enabling environment for mining to thrive in South Africa. And I'd like to refer you to our integrated annual report where we outline what thriving means for South African industry. It's an industry represented by diversification, not only in terms of the commodities, but the people who sit on the board, by gender, by race, and geography in terms of being represented throughout the country of South Africa, as well as by size of operations. Very strong focus on governance as well. The mining industry is a key part of the economy, and as you can see from the slides, 2023 contributed 6.3% of GDP. Previous to that, 7.3%, and I'll be touching on what we're doing to try and arrest that decline. All the green numbers, in fact, represent what I'd like to call the mining industry continuing to deliver on its social bargain, from a number of people employed, payment of taxes, as well as contribution to the fiscus, a total of about 172 billion rands in 2023 alone across all categories of tax. Unfortunately, the red numbers do reflect, the challenges that we've been experiencing in terms of logistics and electricity. This is a great graph that I'd like to share quite often when I'm on stage, once again emphasizing the diversity of the industry. The dotted yellow line shows what was indicated before by the minister in terms of after more than 100 years of mining, our gold mining industry has been in decline. But needless to say, and you would have heard from previous speakers as well, that there still continues to be mining. But I think what is most interesting is the graph at the top, which is showing where else mining is growing, which is in the rest of the commodity base, as outlined by Errol, as well as the minister speaking to some of the bulk mining that's taking place. And we've seen this growth since the early 80s, where we are today, it's grown at about 75%, and really due to recent challenges with utilities and network, that's come down to about 65%. But there's more to come. We believe in terms of where we're going in terms of critical minerals. We're working together with the DMRE in terms of the MPRDA review, looking at exploration. I don't need to mention anything about the cadastral system. I think that's been sufficiently mentioned. But we really are looking at more investor-friendly legislation. But it's worth mentioning that the past 2 to 3 years, we really did experience almost an hemorrhaging of the economy as a result of the poor performance on our electricity, our logistics in terms of both rail and ports, and we've seen increasing crime and corruption, particularly when it comes to illegal mining. And so given where we are, working in this partnership with government, we've set ourselves some great ambitions. We want to see the economy grow at 3 to 5%, and this will enable us to create employment of about 2.5 million, which will arrest the current increasing unemployment rate. And I think combined with that, it will also result in increased confidence, not only amongst the investment community, but I think first and foremost amongst us, ourselves as South Africans. But it's fair to say that there's a logic and sequence to how we get to that point of creating 2.5 million jobs. I think we've seen some reforms coming through in energy logistics, and we're seeing some reforms coming through on the MPRD as well. And this is beginning to increase confidence within the country amongst our citizens, especially after the recent elections. And I'll show you a slide or two later, which is also showing some improvement in investor sentiment. And we believe this will then result in growth, which needs to be above the population growth. And we've unfortunately seen South Africans getting poorer as the economy has been anemic. And with mining being a primary industry, we're seeing that catalyzing the secondary and tertiary industries, which will then result in increased skills development, quality employment as mining can provide, and then that also contributing to sustainable transformation. And so the focus of the partnership between business and government has been on these three areas of energy, logistics, and crime and corruption. On energy side, we've been looking at, across all three, we're looking at what we can fix, what we need to build, and what are the necessary reforms to achieve that. Key to energy was arresting the load shedding, and we're already sitting at close to 6 months without load shedding, and this is injecting huge confidence into the economy. From a rail perspective, still some work to be done, but I believe we are arresting the decline in the performance of Transnet. And I think what we can look forward to there is the participation of private sector in that area. On the crime and corruption, that is a more recent activity, but also promising, particularly when it comes to businesses' participation, as you'll see in this slide, the establishment of Business Against Crime. Business has been very active, and later I'll show you a slide where the mining industry itself has actually been quite active and being involved in each of these three areas. We've contributed not only capital, but also skills in each of these areas. Within Eskom, working very closely with the new leadership, experts and project managers within the logistics area. And then we're seeing also in the crime and corruption investments in significant security personnel and systems such as not only robots but drones to improve on security. And how has mining played a role in some of these structural reforms? From an energy perspective, yes, coal is a critical mineral in South Africa. And I think what is fair to say is that critical mineral is something that is defined from the perspective of domestic needs. And we've seen so far how the definition of critical minerals has largely been driven by the global north. From a global south perspective, it's about energy security, of which coal remains an important component. The mining industry is amongst the largest investors in South Africa in terms of renewable energy. Of the 22 gigawatts that is being installed, about 75% of that is done by mining. From logistics, we were instrumental in assisting the National Logistics Crisis Committee in raising funding to ensure that there's continued injection of the necessary skills to work closely with government and Transnet in ensuring that it improves its performance, and as well as enabling the supply of 1,800 batteries for Transnet. I'm personally quite involved in terms of the crime and corruption in some of the work streams. And then one other key infrastructure area is also on water, where we've seen in areas such as the Northern Cape, where we've heard a lot about manganese development and copper, some of the large mines are involved in enabling the financing of some significant water infrastructure, as well as in Limpopo. And Limpopo and Northern Cape are two of the most prospective destinations for mining in South Africa. And their mining is proving itself in terms of enabling the financing of, co-financing of this infrastructure alongside government. Progress so far has been quite impressive. As I've mentioned, with the installation of renewable energy, this has provided excess energy for Eskom, and hence we've seen the reduction in load shedding. From a Transnet perspective, I'd like to believe that we are hitting the bottom in terms of the performance of rail and port. And then from a crime corruption, I think we'll begin to see prosecution coming through. And this, as I've mentioned, is leading to investor sentiment being positive, and this was further enhanced with the recent outcome of the elections, particularly when you look at the priorities that have been set by the new government. Huge focus on inclusive growth and employment creation, which should result in the reduction of poverty. We've seen the global crisis of high cost of living, and we're playing a very big role in also assisting government enhance its capacity. And we've seen what we call the South African share price improving as a result of that, measured by the strengthening of the exchange rate, but we've seen the financial sector improving the rating, cost of capital in terms of the bond rate coming down, and this bodes well for future financing. Globally as well, the same story if you look at how South Africa has been performing against its peers. And this is taking place at a time when I think we've seen a very favorable environment taking place globally, with turning around of inflation. I think we mentioned the cost of living that should be impacted positively, but also the cost of mining, as was indicated earlier. And with the resulting reduction in interest rates, I think this should provide some reprieve to society and greater community. We do all need to remain vigilant in terms of the potential outcome of the US elections. I think nobody wants to predict what may come out of that. Equally, South Africa is a huge player in the field of critical minerals, and this was spoken about by previous speakers. I don't need to repeat that. And then, what are the opportunities that we see in terms of South African mining industry? I think it's fair to say that we're all gearing for growth. Grassroots exploration is where the future of mining is for South Africa, and this will be complementing and supplementing the growth and expansion that should come through from the large players. Increasing M&A activity. Being in Australia, I don't have to say too much about that, and we've seen recent interest in a so-called South African company. It's great to see South African companies also investing and preparing themselves for this future growth in terms of productivity and decarbonization, which are two sides of the same coin through the adoption of technology, be it 4IR, artificial intelligence, and I've spoken about the investment in renewables to secure a future for themselves. And then embedding themselves in the supply chain in terms of this concept of value in use and ensuring quality metals going into processing. And one of my favorite, Magnificent Seven. South Africa has its own Magnificent Seven. You would have heard of the concept from a technology perspective. And what are these Magnificent Seven? I won't mention all of them, but one of them certainly has to be a functioning democracy, so as we've seen it deliver the outcome of the elections. Mining is certainly one of those, Magnificent Seven. And then I also have to mention the youthful population that South Africa has, our capital markets, and these all, in my view, will contribute towards a successful mining industry going forward. Looking countrywide, and I think this applies also to the rest of the region, I think one of the things that we really have to look at is the whole concept of beneficiation. And whilst we may have heard a lot of governments speak of restrictions and bans, I think this is really just another way of talking about how do countries that supply these metals benefit and develop the economies through the extraction of minerals, but also value addition going forward. And so working with government, between government and business, we see it being a virtuous cycle, which starting with investment in basic infrastructure such as logistics and energy, this will provide for improvements in operational performance, which will then provide confidence in mining, resulting in expansion and further investment through mining capex. And this then results in more demand for these services, and so it becomes a virtual circle. Obviously, it's important to consider where commodity prices will be as we go through this process. And so lastly, and in conclusion, really see more upside than downside. From a global perspective, I think the turnaround in inflation trajectory and the interest rate cycle, I think, is boding very well for emerging market economies. The opportunities and risks in green transition, and I think as Africa we're well positioned to play a role with that. And I think it's been said that without Africa it's unlikely that we'll be able to see this transition happen. But also, mindful of the fact that China remains the largest consumer of commodities, and what happens in China certainly affects the commodity sector. And then from a South Africa specific perspective, we'll continue to capitalize on the post-election sentiment, and we've seen accelerating reforms. The investment drive, I think, is quite encouraging in terms of the reforms that we're seeing from a private sector participation in rail. This is encouraging, and we should see something happening before the end of the year. The reduced load shedding, that's now going to be followed through with some increased capex in transmission, which then means that we'll see much more investment in renewables. And I've spoken about water, as well as working closely with the capacitation of government, and the work that we're doing together with the DMRE in terms of the MPR review has been very encouraging in recent times. And I think we do need to look at how, as a country and a continent, we can benefit from not only the extraction of the minerals, but also the value addition. Thank you very much, and